The restaurant was full that evening, every table buzzing with chatter and laughter, the sound of clinking glasses filling the air. Among the guests was a billionaire, known not only for his wealth but for the way people watched his every move. Sitting beside him was his young son, a boy with bright eyes but silent struggles. He was deaf. While his father tried to make the night feel normal, the boy's attempt to communicate in sign language drew the wrong kind of attention. Instead of kindness, whispers turned into smirks, and soon soft laughter spread across the room. The boy's small hands froze mid-gesture, his face dropping as though the whole world had turned against him. The billionaire's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, unsure whether to protect his son or shield him from further stares. Around them, the laughter grew, cruel in its ignorance, until one person noticed what no one else seemed to see: the pain in the boy's eyes. It wasn't another guest, nor his powerful father who stepped forward. It was the waitress carrying a tray, watching the scene unfold as her heart pounded. Something inside her refused to let this continue. She set down the tray, her eyes locking on the boy, then on the crowd. With calm determination, she did something that made every whisper vanish and every laugh die in the air. For the first time that evening, the boy felt seen, not as someone different, but as someone worthy of respect. The room, once filled with mocking laughter, turned silent in awe. What exactly did the waitress do that silenced an entire restaurant? And how did her simple action change not only the boy's night but the billionaire's life forever? The answer will leave you speechless. The silence that followed was heavier than the laughter that had come before. The guests, still holding their drinks and forks midair, stared at the waitress, unsure how to react. The boy, his hands still paused in the air, blinked at her, uncertain if she was about to scold him or protect him. But her gentle smile told him something different. She wasn't looking at him with pity, nor with judgment, only recognition. It was as if, in that crowded restaurant, she spoke his language without saying a single word. The billionaire shifted in his chair, his guarded expression breaking for a moment. For years, he had fought private battles most people couldn't see. His son's deafness wasn't a weakness to him, but the world rarely saw it that way. At board meetings, in public gatherings, even at schools, people reduced his boy to his silence. He had tried tutors, programs, even moved cities to find a place where his son could simply belong. Yet here, in his own city, in the middle of a restaurant filled with polished faces, the cruel truth echoed once again. People laughed at what they didn't understand. The waitress's name was Emma, though no one there had thought to notice her before. She had served plates and cleared tables countless times, invisible to the very people she catered to. But in that moment, invisibility became her strength. She leaned closer to the boy, her hands moving slowly, deliberately. To the shock of everyone watching, she began signing. Her gestures were not perfect, but clear enough for the boy's eyes to widen. He signed back, cautious at first, then with growing excitement. It was as if someone had finally switched on a light he had been waiting for all his life. The room, however, didn't warm so easily. Some guests exchanged glances, embarrassed now by their own behavior, while others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to admit what they had done. The billionaire's gaze stayed locked on Emma, his mind racing. Who was this young woman, and how did she know sign language? More importantly, why did she care? Most people wouldn't risk drawing attention to themselves, not when the laughter had been so loud. Emma herself felt her heart racing. She hadn't planned this, and yet the sight of the boy shrinking under the weight of so many stares had struck her deeper than she expected. She remembered her younger brother, who had once struggled in the same way, cut off from a world too loud to listen. She remembered the nights she had practiced sign language just to give him a voice. And now, here she was, standing in front of strangers who had forgotten what compassion looked like. The boy laughed silently, a bright, unguarded smile spreading across his face. His father felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't allowed in a long time: hope. But even as the small moment of connection unfolded, questions lingered in the air. The billionaire's reputation was built on control, on never letting anyone close. Yet this waitress, a stranger in an apron, had stepped into his carefully guarded world without permission. What did this mean for him, for his son, for the life he had worked so hard to protect? And why did Emma, a simple waitress, carry the weight of a story that felt larger than anyone in the room could yet understand? The night was far from over, and already the balance of power had begun to shift. The boy's hands moved quickly now, his fingers shaping words his father couldn't fully understand, but Emma could. She nodded, responding with patient signs, her lips curving into encouragement. To anyone watching, it was like a secret world had opened up between them. The billionaire sat back, torn between pride and unease. He was proud to see his son come alive, but uneasy because he was no longer in control of the moment. For a man who had built an empire by controlling every outcome, that loss of power unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Around the room, the mood shifted in strange ways. Some guests, guilty of their laughter only minutes earlier, whispered excuses under their breath. A few rolled their eyes, unwilling to acknowledge their cruelty, while others stared, unable to look away from the growing bond between the waitress and the boy. It wasn't just about kindness anymore. It was about truth being revealed in plain sight. And truth always made people uncomfortable. Emma continued signing, but beneath her calm smile, her chest tightened. She hadn't meant to draw attention to herself. The billionaire's piercing eyes never left her, and she wondered if she had just crossed a line. Waitresses weren't supposed to interfere, not in this kind of restaurant, not in the presence of men who carried fortunes in their wallets. But how could she have stayed silent? She had seen too much silence in her own life. Her brother struggling in classrooms, ignored by teachers who gave up too easily. Her mother working double shifts to pay for speech therapy that never came. She knew what it meant to be overlooked, and she wasn't about to let this boy feel the same way. The billionaire leaned forward, finally speaking, his voice low but steady. "You know sign language." It wasn't a question of curiosity, but one of suspicion. To him nothing was ever just chance. People always had motives, and he had built his empire by uncovering them before anyone else could. Emma swallowed hard, nodding. "A little," she replied softly. "Enough to listen." Her words hung in the air, simple yet piercing. Enough to listen, the one thing money couldn't buy, yet the one thing the boy needed most. The boy tugged at his father's sleeve, signing rapidly, his eyes pleading for him to understand. The billionaire felt a pang of helplessness. He had paid for the best tutors, the best programs, yet his son rarely lit up the way he did now. Emma watched them both, torn between wanting to bridge the gap and fearing she had already stepped too far. In the shadows of the dining room, not everyone's attention was on the boy. At a corner table, a man in a gray suit watched Emma closely, his expression unreadable. Unlike the others, he hadn't laughed earlier. He had only observed. Now his eyes narrowed, as if this sudden exchange between the waitress and the billionaire's son mattered far more than it should. Emma didn't notice him, but his interest was not casual. The night stretched on, plates half finished, conversations muted. Suspense lingered like an uninvited guest. The billionaire, the boy, the waitress. All three were tied together now, not by chance, but by something deeper. And while the restaurant seemed to return to its rhythm, the truth was clear. This was no ordinary evening. Something had begun that no one could yet explain, and it was only a matter of time before the hidden conflicts surfaced, pulling each of them into a story that none had planned to tell. The billionaire's hand tightened around his glass as he studied Emma. Her presence unsettled him in ways he couldn't fully explain. She wasn't like the polished executives he dealt with, nor like the tutors and specialists he had hired for his son. She was ordinary, yet in a single moment she had done what all his wealth and influence had failed to achieve. She had given his boy a voice. The room was still, but inside his chest, tension built like a storm waiting to break. His son kept signing excitedly, his hands flying with energy. The boy wanted his father to join in, to understand. But the billionaire, a man who had mastered numbers, deals, and negotiations, felt powerless in the face of his own child's language. He glanced at Emma again, his pride battling with something unfamiliar, dependence. He hated the idea that he might need her. Emma sensed the weight of the moment pressing down on all sides. The stares of the other guests still clung to her, some curious, others critical. She wanted to step back, to fade into the background like before, but the boy's hopeful eyes wouldn't let her. He had found someone who understood him, and she couldn't abandon him now. Still, she knew she was standing on dangerous ground. A billionaire was watching her with suspicion, and strangers were judging her every move. Her own heartbeat echoed louder than the clinking of glasses around the room. Then the man in the gray suit shifted in his chair. For the first time, Emma caught his stare. His gaze wasn't casual, it was sharp, calculating. She froze, the tray still balanced against her side. Who was he, and why was he watching so intently? The longer their eyes locked, the more she realized this wasn't just about kindness anymore. Something larger was moving beneath the surface, something she couldn't yet see. The billionaire noticed the gray-suited man too. He leaned back, his mind racing. He was used to being followed, used to eyes watching his every step, but tonight felt different. This wasn't business rivalry or social curiosity. It was something else, something personal. He reached for his son, pulling him close, but the boy resisted, still eager to keep signing with Emma. The billionaire's chest tightened with conflict. Was this waitress a lifeline or a threat? The air in the restaurant grew heavier, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. Conversations had thinned to whispers. Even the laughter that had mocked the boy earlier was gone, replaced by a silence that felt charged, dangerous. Emma looked between the billionaire, the boy, and the man in the corner, her mind spinning. She had stepped into this moment out of instinct, but now she realized she was standing at the edge of something far bigger than herself. The boy's small hand signed one word, simple but powerful. Friend. His eyes shone with trust. The billionaire swallowed hard, torn between his son's joy and the tightening sense that this night was about to change everything. Emma felt it too. The fragile connection they had built was about to be tested in a way none of them were ready for. And then, almost as if on cue, the man in the gray suit rose from his seat. All eyes turned toward him, the tension snapping like a wire pulled too tight. The climax was no longer distant, it was walking straight toward them. The man in the gray suit walked forward, his footsteps echoing through the restaurant, each one cutting deeper into the thick silence. The guests leaned back in their seats, their earlier bravado shrinking into nervous curiosity. No one laughed now. The billionaire's jaw tightened as he instinctively pulled his son closer, his mind already racing through possibilities. Was this man a stranger, or someone who had been following them for longer than he realized? Emma's pulse quickened, her instincts telling her that whatever was about to unfold was far bigger than the embarrassment that had started the evening. The man stopped at their table, his eyes sweeping over the billionaire before resting on the boy. For a moment, he said nothing, letting the silence drag on until it was nearly unbearable. Then, in a calm but steady voice, he asked the boy a question, not in spoken words but in sign language. Gasps rippled through the room. The boy's eyes lit up in recognition, his hands immediately responding with quick, eager signs. Emma froze. This wasn't part of her imagination. The man could sign too, and fluently better than she could. But the look in his eyes didn't carry kindness the way hers had. Carried intent, purpose. The billionaire's face darkened. He didn't understand the conversation, but he understood enough to know that his son was opening up to a stranger in a way he never had with anyone else. The boy smiled wide, completely unaware of the storm gathering around him, as he signed faster, sharing pieces of his world that his father had never been able to reach. Emma's chest tightened. She wanted to interrupt, to shield the boy from whatever this stranger's motives were, but she was frozen between two powerful forces, the billionaire's guarded stare and the stranger's calm, steady presence. She glanced at the father, whose grip on his glass was so tight she thought it might shatter. Then came the twist no one expected. The man turned his gaze directly to the billionaire and spoke aloud this time, his voice cutting through the tension. "Your son has been waiting for someone to listen. But you're not the only one watching him tonight." His words hung in the air like a warning, and the weight behind them sent a shiver through the room. The guests shifted uneasily, sensing danger but not understanding it. The billionaire leaned forward, his voice low, demanding answers, but the man in gray only smiled faintly, his hand resting briefly on the boy's shoulder before pulling back. The boy looked between them, confused by the sudden change in tone, his smile fading. Emma stepped forward, her instincts screaming that something wasn't right. She had no idea who this man was or what his connection to the boy could be, but she knew one thing for certain: the night was spiraling into something far beyond a simple act of kindness. The stakes had risen, and now every move mattered. The billionaire's empire had always been built on power and control. But here, in the center of a restaurant filled with strangers, he realized control was slipping away, taken by a waitress who had dared to care and a mysterious man who knew far too much. The question now was simple, yet terrifying. What did this man want with his son? The billionaire rose slowly from his chair, the air around him charged with tension. Every eye in the restaurant followed him as he stepped between the man in the gray suit and his son. His voice was firm, low, but laced with something raw. "If you have something to say it to me. Leave my son out of this." His son tugged at his sleeve, signing in confusion, not understanding why the warmth of conversation had turned so cold. The man in gray held up his hands calmly, then signed a message the boy translated aloud in his halting voice, his words soft but clear enough for everyone to hear. "He knows what your son needs because he once lived the same way." Gasps rippled across the room. Emma's eyes widened as the truth sank in. The man wasn't mocking or threatening. He was revealing himself. He too was deaf once, raised in silence, before surgery restored part of his hearing. He hadn't come to harm the boy. He had come because he recognized him, saw his loneliness, and could not stand by. The billionaire froze, his breath catching in his chest. For years, he had carried the guilt of not being able to give his son the connection he deserved. He had tried tutors, programs, even gadgets, but what his son needed most was someone who understood from the inside. Now here was a stranger, someone with no wealth, no ties, showing him what true understanding looked like. His empire, his pride, his silence. All of it crumbled in the face of his son's smile. Emma stepped forward, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Maybe it isn't about power or money. Maybe it's about listening, really listening." Her words struck deeper than she expected, even drawing nods from some guests who had once laughed. The billionaire turned to his son, finally trying a clumsy sign with his own hand. The boy's eyes widened, then filled with tears as he realized his father was finally trying to meet him halfway. The moment was fragile, but it was real. The room softened, the tension melting into something new: hope. The billionaire, for the first time, wasn't shielding his son from the world. He was stepping into it with him. Emma exhaled, relief washing over her, certain the conflict had found its resolution. But just as the boy reached for his father's hand, the man in gray leaned closer, his final words cutting through the fragile peace. "Be careful who you trust," he whispered, his eyes flicking briefly toward one of the guests still seated in the corner. "The laughter tonight was only the beginning. Others are watching." The billionaire stiffened, Emma's heart skipped, and the boy clung tighter to his father. The restaurant seemed to shrink around them, the sense of safety slipping away once more. They had found connection, but in the shadows lingered a warning that this was not the end of their story, only the start of something far more dangerous. The billionaire stood frozen for a long moment, his son's small hand gripping his tightly, Emma watching with concern, and the man in gray's warning still hanging heavy in the air. The guests, though trying to return to their meals, could not escape the sense that something extraordinary had happened right before their eyes. The mocking laughter that had once filled the room was now replaced with a deep, uneasy respect. No one dared to break the silence again. Slowly, the billionaire exhaled, his shoulders lowering as though he had just dropped a weight he had carried for years. He looked at his son and then at Emma, the young waitress who had shown courage when everyone else turned away. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. For a man whose words usually carried power, these two simple words carried more meaning than any deal he had ever signed. Emma nodded, her throat tight, realizing she had stepped into something that would change them all. The boy signed again, eager, hopeful, and this time his father responded. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but with effort. The boy's smile stretched wide, his eyes bright with a joy that needed no translation. The billionaire's chest ached with both regret and relief. He knew he had missed moments, but tonight proved it wasn't too late to begin again. The man in gray gave a final nod, his expression unreadable. Emma wanted to ask what he meant by his warning, but before she could speak, he slipped back toward the door, vanishing into the night. It was as if he had only appeared to shake them awake and leave them with questions they would have to answer themselves. The billionaire watched him go, his mind unsettled, but when he turned back to his son, the unease was tempered by determination. Whatever dangers or whispers lingered beyond these walls, he knew what mattered most was standing right beside him. The other diners, humbled, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few even rose and walked past the boy with quiet nods, gestures of respect that replaced their earlier cruelty. They left with more than full stomachs. They left with a story that would stay with them, a lesson about compassion, understanding, and the danger of mocking what they didn't understand. As the night wound down, Emma returned to her work, though nothing felt ordinary anymore. The billionaire stopped her before leaving, his hand resting on her shoulder with sincerity. "You did more than serve tonight. You reminded us all of what matters." His words brought tears to her eyes, but she simply smiled, grateful that she had acted when it mattered most. Outside, the billionaire walked hand in hand with his son. For once, he wasn't leading him, but walking alongside him, step for step. The boy signed again, slowly teaching his father as they went. The billionaire's lips curved into a faint smile, realizing that true strength was not in silence or control, but in connection. That night, one small act of courage had silenced an entire room and transformed a family. The laughter that had once mocked now served as a reminder. Kindness has the power to turn the cruelest moments into the most unforgettable lessons. And as they disappeared into the night, father and son together, the truth was clear. Listening can change everything.